Mary LaHammer here from Twin Cities PBS and Almanac on a very busy news week, which we will be covering on the show Friday night. Starting with the change in immigration action in Minnesota, home in the new commander saying that he's going to be drawing down. We'll be covering that extensively. And I'll be diving into the forces behind that political shift in particularly that we're seeing. I'll be talking to the gun rights advocate, Rob Dorr. He has done several dozen interviews after we spoke with him at the Capitol this week. He had Dutch TV waiting in the wings. He had already talked to German TV, the BBC. He was on in Asia, all over the United States, and saying that the federal government was not accurate in their depiction of Minnesota gun law when it came to the killing of Alex Preddy, and how he adamantly defended not just Second Amendment rights, but First Amendment rights. So an interesting voice all week long, and maybe part of the change that came in policy. And another person that was more behind the scenes that we're going to have in front of the camera is State House Republican Representative Danny Nadeau. He comes from a 50-50 district, and he had privately written a letter to the president and the governor. And he said, "Governor, call the president." And he said to the president, "Pick up the phone." Now, he doesn't know whether anyone listened to them. He said he might have been part of hundreds or thousands of people saying the very same thing. But the governor did reach out and thanked Republican Representative Nadeau for the idea. And, really some bold conclusions. Representative Nadeau, the Republican, ultimately said, no one should die at a protest. He kind of said enough's enough and says it's time to not just reach across the aisle a little bit, but he said to reach way across the aisle. And the time was now for change. So tune in for much more on some of the forces behind the scenes that are creating this change in the politics and maybe the policy now on immigration action. Last week I had former governors who were advising current Governor Walz, and that is still making news. In fact, one governor's comments have now gone viral. And we had that clip on Almanac last week of former Governor Jesse Ventura saying, if President Trump dislikes Minnesota so much, let's join Canada. Well, a guy named Marco Foster on X picked a clip from the podcast, the actual podcast, not the Almanac clip, it looks like. The podcast is called Spin Sisters, a new podcast that I launched with my friend Tara Erickson. Spin Sisters was not given credit. This guy clipped it, and then it was reposted by Aaron Rupar. Aaron is a Minnesotan with 1 million followers on X, and Aaron is a friend of a friend, so I reached out to Aaron in the night, and we had a conversation. Really fantastic and advice he gave me on what happens when it looks like you're going viral. I wasn't quite sure what to do. And so Aaron retweeted our tweet when we said, here's how you can find the rest of the interview. It's on this podcast called Spin Sisters. And so far, that has 750,000 views and has been on a lot of other websites, news outlets. Yahoo News did a story on it and identified my day job at Twin Cities PBS. Apparently Fox News nationally had a clip. I had somebody on Facebook message me a screenshot and said, "You've really made it. You're on Fox News." Both of those did give the podcast Spin Sisters credits. We did see that suddenly there was an uptick on YouTube where we are posting at hundreds of views an hour, and now we're at thousands of views on YouTube. You can check it out. Also, if you just want to listen, the podcast is on Apple and Spotify. And we did release Governor Arne Carlson's interview there, and really he puts on what we're calling a master class in democracy and history. And he really pinpoints that change in the Republican Party nationally, but also here in Minnesota. And he tells the story of when, as the incumbent governor, popular, high approval ratings, he went to the state convention and the delegates turned their backs on him, and he still gave a speech to a party that turned his back. And he said that's when the party for him changed. And then also Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty talked about how he also saw the party change on him, and he thought he could be an environmentalist. And he signed a really aggressive renewable energy bill, which the state just recently met in 2025, the standards that he signed into law as a Republican, and then later, kind of got in trouble for that and said, you're not allowed to leave the confines of your party anymore, and how disappointing that was for him. and how when he ran for president or was being considered for vice president with John McCain as a running mate, that you just couldn't be outside the box anymore. And both these former governors who were Republicans were talking about how much the party's changed, and really interesting, and I urge you to go listen to that. The other thing you'll notice, and you could see this in the Almanac clip that we had on air last week, you could hear Governor Ventura say, I'm going to say this right here on the show, because Ventura's always known how to make news. We've had so many interviews with him over the years on Twin Cities PBS and Almanac at the Capitol. And you can hear him say, I'm going to say it right here. How about Minnesota just becomes part of Canada? And this goes back to his history as a pro wrestler. And his best asset was always his gift for gab and ad-libbing. And we detailed this in the documentary Jesse Ventura Shocks the World. And we are going to re-release that with all this renewed interest in Ventura since he showed up at Roosevelt High School, his alma mater, where ICE agents showed up and the students led a walkout, and they've done press conferences since. And Ventura kind of had a mini viral moment when some of the news crews there put him on, and then he came on with us in the podcast, and then we featured that on Almanac. So Ventura is kind of hot online right now, so we are going to re-release Jesse Ventura Shock the World. I will link to it. You can find it on tpt.org. We're working on getting that on YouTube, so check that out. And again, Friday night on Almanac, we will have the latest, many guests looking especially at this change now in the politics and the policy and the practical reality of the immigration issue, as Minnesota's been front and center for the whole nation and really the world watching our state and the city of Minneapolis, and much more about Minnesota politics and the big news here that U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar now joining the race for governor. We will analyze all of that, so be sure to tune in. Another really big news week, Friday night on Almanac.